Hello, time for another vlog, because I haven't been out anywhere. Um, Weather's okay, but we're semi-locked down, and I'm temporarily out of ideas of where to wander around anyway. So let me know if you think of something, but I might go out at some point, I don't know. So just a few things that I've been pondering on and off as the week has happened. It's mainly sort of a newsy sort of week, because it looks like we're finally going to get a Brexit of no deal, which is in a way pretty much inevitable by the way it looks, the way it's been going. Will they make a last minute deal? Don't know. There's yet another deadline tomorrow, so we'll see. We've only got 3 weeks to go anyway, I think, or something like that, to the end of December when we crash out one way or another. I mean, I was, and I suppose still am, in favour of Brexit as an idea, but I did really want a deal. But having a deal or no deal was not on the table in the referendum. It was just out or not, right? There wasn't a question, is it okay for us to leave without a deal? And it's difficult to know what kind of a deal could be possible, because all of the things we don't want are exactly the things that the EU does want. Free travel, jurisdiction of the International Court of Human Rights or European Court of Justice, isn't it? And etc. etc. Regulations, this and that. So the government talks about an Australia-style arrangement with the EU. What that means is no deal, because Australia doesn't have a special arrangement with the EU, right? They have individual agreements on individual products. So they've got a number of agreements on this or that, but no overall deal. But of course, this has to be the worst year, really, for this to happen, because at the same time as we're crashing out of the EU one way or another, we've also got the fairy dust from China making people ill, and the lockdowns that come with that. So it's double jeopardy when we look at the economy. The plague has trashed economies worldwide. We're not feeling it yet because the government is printing fake money and spending like crazy to try and keep people in jobs and so on, but we know that the economy without all that fake money is down about 30% or so. This is the biggest drop since the Great Depression. And thinking about it, it's even bigger than like the effect of the Second World War, where our industries were being bombed to smithereens, right? It's worse than that, economically speaking. Because it's the worst since the Great Depression, which was before the Second World War, right? And so we've got that, and we've got Brexit, no deal probably on top of it. Economic doom? Oh yes. Now, the fakers that be, the powers that be, might be able to cover it up by printing more and more money. But money is debt in our system. They don't actually create real money, they borrow it from banks, who will charge some level of interest, zero more or less at the moment. But sooner or later, one day, that's going to go up. Or, well, either way, we're going to get a switch over to inflation one day. And then we will pay. I mean, economic doom is going to hit the UK, the EU, everywhere else probably as well, almost. And we're going to get a double dose in Britain because of Brexit as well, I would suggest. Maybe it's good to get it all out of the way at once. One generation of disaster and then things will be all right again. Maybe. I don't know. It's not looking good, though. And what it will do, of course, unemployment is going to massively increase because so many businesses are going to close or have closed and can't reopen. Lots and lots of small businesses, which are really the main engine of the economy in terms of jobs, are never coming back. And those people have lost their life savings, most likely, and so will not be able to restart another business. They won't have assets that they can give to the banks in order to get more loans to start another business, because the banks will have taken their previous assets already. So recovery will not be quick. I think it will be slow, like another Great Depression, in other words. And a lot of those jobs, of course, will never come back, because we now have the fourth industrial revolution, automation, computers, robots, which will do a lot of jobs. Drivers. Within 10 years, maybe there won't be very many of those. Most jobs where people are sat in front of computers, managing spreadsheets and stuff, this can probably be done by computers in the first place. That's all the so-called bullshit jobs, basically, will be replaceable. All the ones where you're essentially box ticking. Office jobs. Physical jobs, probably harder to replace, but ultimately replaceable. But we can wait a bit for that. So we can expect, therefore, some changes to capitalism, because people are going to want a universal basic income to make up for the fact that they don't have proper jobs anymore, or people are going to want an expanded welfare state. And I think capitalism is going to have to grant it. Remember, we've been through this cycle before. In the 1950s, roughly speaking, after the Second World War, socialism was all the rage, and actually the Soviet Union was doing well, was doing better than the West for a time. And people were a little bit panicked about that, the powers that be, the capitalists, and the general public were very left-wing socialist, strong trade unions and so on. And in order to maintain the capitalist system, the welfare state was pretty much implemented throughout the West. Better in some places than others, but still. We had the New Deal in the USA even before the Second World War. And capitalism saved itself from maybe what could have been revolutions. There were riots and whatnot in 1968. That was a year of a lot of trouble, but the system adapted and fine. And then came the 80s, Thatcherism, Reaganism, where the capitalists decided to try and claw back some of this welfare nonsense, right? They think nonsense. I am someone who's in favour of welfare states and mixed economies. But obviously the super rich are not, or the rulers don't seem to be. They seem to want everything for themselves and nothing for anybody else, as Adam Smith put it. And so the welfare state has been slowly clawed back since the 80s, basically, and people's rights in work have been reduced. Welfare systems have got worse and worse. And I mean, in the United States, it's just appalling now. I mean, you have so many homeless people. I mean, in Los Angeles, the homeless encampments cover 54 city blocks. It's if it wasn't true, it would be. I would find it unimaginable in the wealthiest country in the world. But if the Americans are going to have a population that believes in the American way, ultimately, that cannot carry on. And the fact that the majority of bankruptcies over there are medical bankruptcies, and large numbers of them, is obscene, frankly. And even in a country like Britain, where we've had the Tories clawing back welfare benefits and states and systems and basically mucking it up on the grounds that people need incentives to better themselves, which is strange because there's lots of welfare for the rich, subsidies and so on. But I think in the event of the coming economic doom, people are not going to put up with that, and capitalism will again have to issue the largesse in order to survive. We've seen how close we are to pseudo-communist unrest with BLM and other rioters. Organised opposition to the system. And that can spread if people remain unhappy or feel disengaged from the system, feel that the system is not for them, it doesn't work for them, it works only for the rich. Then the system will not survive. So, I think capitalism will again adapt, and we will have a universal basic income or some other form of greatly expanded welfare state throughout the West. Either that or that's it for the system, I think. This is kind of the Great Reset that Klaus, what's his name? I've read his book, okay. Talks about. You can look up the videos on the World Economic Forum, okay. It's kind of that. It is. Many people accuse him of kind of socialism, and it is. A welfare state is a kind of a socialism. It's not the full tyrannical system, but it's, if you like, some of the better bits of it. An economic system should work for everybody, and obviously we know that capitalism is designed to work for the rich primarily, but it's also the best system for improving a society's standard of living, or so it seems. Historically it has been anyway, and for maintaining human rights and freedoms, because we know that, say, the Chinese system is quite economically efficient, or it has been. They're getting into trouble now. But it's tyrannical. And who in their right mind wants that, other than the tyrants, really? So you can look forward to a proper welfare state coming back, probably fairly quickly. But whether it will be economically viable, or whether we will have to have some serious crash and reorganisation, I don't know. But with the economic doom of Brexit added up to fairy dust, I think it's going to be quite severe. And that's in Britain and in the EU, because without Britain in the EU, they're going to be worse off too. They have their own political troubles and whatnot, of course, as well, and financial troubles, because the European Euro system and all that is a bit awful. Trying to use the same currency for countries which are poor as countries that are rich isn't really working for the poor countries. So you have the same thing. The system isn't working for the poorer members. And the capitalist system never really does work for the poorer members, but it can compensate for that if the ruling classes are clever enough to do so, rather than be eliminated themselves. So that's what we're waiting for. Meantime, the first vaccine has been launched in the UK, and about 1,000 people have been vaccinated now, so far. Fine. There are, I suppose you call them anti-vaxxers, all over Twitter saying, no, this vaccine is dangerous. And they're making a lot out of the fact that in the trials, I think 4 people died, and 2 had strong allergic reactions. And there are news articles in reputable news organisations saying the same thing. Okay, is it safe? 4 people died in the trials. But for goodness sake, look it up. These 4 people who died, right? 1 was murdered. 1 died in a car accident. 1 suffered a blunt trauma. I don't have the details, but it sounds like they were bashed on the head. Sounds suspicious to me. But vaccines don't do that to you. And the other one I don't know about. Haven't been able to find out. Maybe it was the vaccine. But all 4 of these people received the placebo, which was either a saline solution or a mumps vaccine. They were given as a meningococcus vaccine instead, as a placebo. So probably, with the possible exception of 1, none of those deaths were anything to do with the vaccines, and they were certainly not to do with this vaccine, because these people all had the placebo, not the actual vaccine. And the 2 allergies, they were nurses who had known allergies to things like this in the past anyway, and they always carried their EpiPens and their adrenaline or epinephrine doses with them all the time anyway. So they were actually expected to have a reaction, those 2, and they did, and they zapped themselves with the EpiPens and they were fine. This was entirely routine. So it's kind of funny seeing these people on Twitter saying, well, the vaccine isn't safe, 4 people died. I mean, seriously, look it up. Try and find out the actual facts, people. And newspapers saying the same thing. 4 people died, but without saying that actually the deaths were nothing to do with the vaccine. The article in the Lancet says that they were nothing to do with the vaccine. This is, I think, you can say it's a symptom of our social media-led society. Over time, I think people will develop immunity to this sort of nonsense. It's like when we look at advertising from 100 years ago, it's naive and laughable, right? How could people be persuaded by this stupid advertising, right? But today, people are persuaded by today's naive and laughable advertising, right? Where they target your instincts rather than your reason, to bypass your conscious resistance. It's a war, right? It's a war for your money. And over time people become resistant to this or that style of advertising, and it changes again, and people become resistant to that, and so on. And in the case of the social media, I think the method of resistance is for people to learn critical thinking. In this case, it means actually noticing when you're being given hearsay, just what someone is saying, and learning to try and find the original source of the information and the details. So don't rely on when someone says 4 people died during the trials, this vaccine isn't safe. Check it. And you find they are leaving out critical information. And that's why you need critical thinking. Look for the original sources of the information. It's often out there. Sometimes it's hard to get. Sometimes it's behind a paywall. And you have to instead get it from a secondary source who is in the business and has therefore a subscription to the relevant information services and can tell you. And if you find them trustworthy, you can go by what they say. This is what you do, but you don't go by someone who is on the social media for the sake of gaining notoriety or to sell their books. I mean, you know, David Icke, a lot of the things he says do seem to be true, but his attitude to vaccines, I think, is just completely wrong. They do not contain nanomachines to take over your body yet. There's certainly no evidence that they do, let's put it that way. And critical thinking means looking for the original source of the actual information, the actual evidence, not just somebody's idea, and not just coincidence because person A knows person B and isn't that suspicious. You need more than that. And there are people who say the vaccine contains RNA and that can be written back to your DNA and change your genetic code and turn you into a slave. Right? The Pfizer vaccine does contain RNA, but it doesn't contain reverse transcriptase, the enzyme which would be needed to allow your cells to write it back to your DNA. And the cells don't contain the reverse transcriptase either, so it's not going to happen. They contain transcriptase, which can be used to read the RNA and build the protein from it, which looks like the virus's protein, so your immune system can build antibodies to it. That's the function. HIV retrovirus has reverse transcriptase, and that little so-and-so can write to your DNA in theory. And that was a particularly troublesome, still is a particularly troublesome pathogen. But the vaccine doesn't contain that, the relevant stuff, basically. I think the Moderna vaccine does contain DNA, but again, it's transcriptase to be used to make the proteins, not to be welded into your own DNA. That is potentially a valid way of altering humans, ultimately, but it's not in the technology at present. As far as I know. If I'm wrong, let me know in the comments. But the trick with critical thinking is to see when what you're seeing is hearsay. And it's hearsay if it is not the original source. So go to the original paper, the original scientific papers if you can, or to someone who has access to them. And we kind of expect our newspapers and media to be doing this for us, and they are not. A lot of the articles, as I mentioned, on the internet that I've looked at, they mention that the people were dying involved in the trials, but they don't mention how come, and that it was nothing to do with the vaccine. They say some of the articles say it was not to do with the vaccine, but they don't explain how come it was not to do with the vaccine, like somebody was murdered, for example. So it leaves it open to doubt. And of course these media make money out of people's uncertainty and fear. Fear, uncertainty and doubt. FUD. FUD is what they make money from. And what you need is peace, certainty. Yeah, that's it. Peace and certainty, how about that? And happiness. And that comes from being at one with your conscious self. Not being involved in your stupid thoughts about how you should be, how things ought to be. Not at all. Just being at one with consciousness. And not believing all the garbage you read in the media and the social media. And if you're interested in it, check it, basically. Try and find it. Try and find the real info, the source of the information. So anyway, that's it. Any comments? How's the economy going to do? Badly, presumably. And are you going to get the vaccine? Am I right? Am I wrong? Bye for now.